Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And moving right along, we get to Spine 55, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, directed by Philip Kaufman, 1988. This one is another classic out-of-print Criterion DVD title. It's now issued by, there was a one-disc from MGM, and then there was a two-disc Warner's that came out. It is yet to be released on Blu-ray. But at any rate, and the only reason why I got this is because somebody offered to me at a decent price. Otherwise, I try not to. Out-of-print Criterion DVD titles tend to be very, very high. Especially if they are rare editions and they're not readily available on home video. The price of it could be quite steep. But for this one, I was able to get it at a decent price. Somebody offered it to me, and I took it. And part of the reason why I took it is because I actually read the Milan Kundera novel. And I figured, okay, why not? But other than that, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be talking about this. But since I have it, and since this whole project is about talking about the Criterions that I own, I'm going to talk about it. And revisiting this, which, by the way, was an attempt to try to cure insomnia, for a 3-hour film, it doesn't really work. I have no idea why. You think that it would just knock me out, but no, it doesn't. For starters, it really is a kind of who's who of European cinema in terms of who was involved, especially on the casting side. For starters, you get Daniel Day-Lewis. Yes, before Lincoln, before There Would Be Blood, before The Last of the Mohicans, and even before In the Name of the Father. He's in this, and I believe this was his major. In fact, for all the leads, these were important debuts. So you have Daniel Day-Lewis, you had Juliette Binoche, and this was her big debut. Again, before Trois Couleurs Bleues, which I will cover, and even more recently, Certified Copy. You have Lena Olin and Erland Jofferson, one who worked with Ingmar Bergman, most famously in Scenes from a Marriage. And you have Daniel Obritsky, who was in The Tin Drum. And you also have Stellan Skarsgård, who has, on the one end, has worked with Lars von Trier on a number of occasions, and on the other hand, he was in the Avengers. So there you go. And one of the writers for the script was Jean-Claude Carrier, and the cinematographer was Sven Nykvist, who famously worked with Bergman in his later period, starting with, I believe, began with Through a Glass Darkly. I know he shot Winter Light, but I think he also shot Through a Glass Darkly, and then shot all of his films pretty much from then on in, except maybe for like one or two exceptions. So yeah, it's definitely a who's who, and Walter Murch was involved in the editing. So it was definitely a who's who of European or European-like cinema that was in this project. No wonder it cost $16 million and only took in 10 in its initial box office receipts. But oh well, this is a film based on a very popular in certain highbrow circles novel. This is not a major bestseller. This is the kind of book that you probably would have read in college. But anyways, now, okay, where to begin with this? I guess one big thing that I kind of came away with was just the nature of adaptation, because the novel itself was famous for being described as unfilmable. In other words, that this was not a novel that could easily translate well into film. But Philip Kaufman with Jean-Claude Carrier managed to pull it off. And I think the reason why they were able to pull it off is that they completely, I don't want to say completely ignored, but they certainly minimized greatly any of the philosophical tangents. This is a book where, for Tomage, he likes to expound on deep things, and this is definitely one of those books where if you want to read about deep and profound things, it's one to go to. If you don't really care for it, then you're just going to hate it. I know someone who really has a beef with Kundera, a respectful beef, not doesn't go on to full rage or anything like that, but definitely does not like him. And actually gave the novel a shot and was like, eh. But anyways, so I mean that was part of that was how they were able to make this work, and it was just basically focusing on the plot, on the characters, and then letting all that other stuff be very mild. And in fact, Kundera, he was involved with the adaptation. In fact, even wrote the poem. There's a scene where Teresa, who Binoche plays, is having trouble going to sleep, and Tomage is trying to lull her to sleep, and he says this poem, and it's actually a poem that Milan Kundera wrote for the film. After the film was done, he pretty much disowned it. He didn't do any publicity for it, and from then on in, he refused permission to have any of his works adapted into film, because he felt that that the philosophy was dumbed down, was diluted. But really, this is one of those cases where if you, first off, it would have been very limited as far as the film appeal. It would not be taking in 10 million in the box office. It would probably take much less. And it's also, this is why it's called unfilmable, is because it doesn't, it's not impossible, but it's not expected to have philosophical tangents translate well into film. And I think this is the brilliance, if you will, in the adaptation, is where by focusing just strictly on the plot and mostly on just the characters and leaving all that philosophical insight, just leaving that alone for the most part. The most interesting one they kept in the film, and I'm glad that if they were going to use one of them, I'm glad they used the one that they did, which was Tomage talking about that we only live one life, that we don't have the ability to live two lives at the same time, where you can do one thing in one and then the opposite in the other. That one was kept, and I remember that stood out to me when I read the novel. And so, and actually that's a sign of a good adaptation, is that if you retain more of the memorable aspects of the novel and then just leave the rest alone, just kind of leave it be, then you got a pretty good adaptation. And so I think, yeah, it's not all about the philosophy, but of course it doesn't, again, it's not a lot of people go out of their way to see philosophy in cinema. Which, on the one hand, it's a little bit of a shame, but on the other hand, I understand that that just doesn't happen. I think we've come a long way since then, in some respects. Maybe not in all, but I'm thinking of like Youth Without Youth, for instance, as being a little bit more philosophical and or dares to talk about ideas in a fairly explicit way and still have it be compelling filmmaking. So, but yeah, this is the way that they were able to adapt it, and I think it works as a film adaptation. It's probably the best you're going to get as far as a workable adaptation. And the other thing that I think most people tend to forget, including authors, is that while adaptations can be very powerful in their own right, and more people can remember a work more from its film adaptation rather than the novel itself, it doesn't in any way replace the novel. The novel is always going to be there, and I think this is what people don't get, like with, say, The Hobbit. Um, there's a big I say needless backlash against The Hobbit, and they make it seem like the films that this first part of a trilogy is completely replacing The Hobbit. And I remember 10 years ago or so when The Lord of the Rings came out, you also had that feeling that these films were going to completely replace the novels. Far from it. I mean, in fact, the novels did very well when the films were out. So these films, they don't replace the novel. The novel is always going to be there. The book is always going to be there. This is just all an adaptation is just translating a work from one medium into another medium. And each medium has their capabilities. And with a novel, you're able to go into philosophical tangents. You're able to write flowery prose and spend a paragraph or two describing a location, or describing a character, or describing the significance of an action, any kind of contemplation or thought. You can do that in a novel. Just by the nature of the media, you're dealing with words, and it's words that are carrying thoughts. Actually, a novel has to carry a lot just by using words. You're expected to know who is who, where things are happening, what, like, the space and what's contained in the space. You're expected to be carried into that, and all by using words. So words have to be, it has to be a description and also do its own thing. Whereas film, you can do a lot. You can speak a lot economically using film, just by the nature of it being visual and also oral. You can say and do things in simple actions and with simple lines of dialogue than you can do in a novel. And it's not trying to make it easier for the audience necessarily, or dumbing it down or whatnot. It's just that you don't need paragraphs and paragraphs of things. You can actually see it in the character, and you can see it in the performance. You can see all that you need to know from the character just by his actions. And this is why I feel that this was a smart adaptation of that particular novel. By focusing on the actions and focusing on the characters and leaving the rest alone, you get a better sense of what is going on. And I think whenever they can incorporate those other things, whether it be in certain lines of dialogue or even just have the actions and the exchanges speak for that. You're not going to cover everything. And considering that it's nearly 3 hours anyway, if you're trying to do a slavishly faithful adaptation, it would end up being, quite frankly, it would have ended up being a mess. That is a complaint that's dished out on the novel, is that Kudera seems to spend a lot of time indulging in these philosophical tangents. But anyway, so really the film itself, it covers this interesting little bohemian menage a trois. Tamaj is a surgeon who also has a penchant for philosophizing and writing. Teresa is you see her doing, basically being a waitress, a simple woman, but eventually she discovers she has a penchant for photography, which ends up being a double-edged sword. it's both a blessing and a curse. And then the third in the equation is Sabine, who is an artist in her own right, and also has a penchant for following her heart and taking her to all kinds of places. And this all takes place in Prague in 1968, during the Prague Spring, and right before the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact invade Prague. And boy, oh boy. And all that ensues. So for its time, it definitely put a light into what happened during that decade, and considering that in a few years after that film was released, the Soviet Union finally did fall. It was, I mean, actually, it's kind of amazing to think about it that this came out a year before the Berlin Wall fell. And actually, it was right around that time when, well, actually, no, I think it was after the Berlin Wall fell, that when the Hungary and Czech borders were demolished, and it actually caused this mass exodus. Everybody that wanted to leave Eastern Europe finally went through there. And I believe that happened after the Berlin Wall fell, or maybe before, but it was very close to that time. So the Iron Curtain was coming down, and eventually the Soviet Union would fall apart. So yeah, it was a much needed push. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that particular nation. I mean, there are some things that are kind of cool about it, but on the whole, it was really it was just awful all around. And stuff like that kind of proves it. It was all done in the name of protecting Czechoslovakia. Why? Why do they feel the need to do that? Oh well. At any rate, so yeah, that's the Unbearable Lightness. And I make it sound like it's a bad. I mean, I don't. As you've seen, there are other films that get me more excited than others, and this is one where I don't feel as excited. I mean, I can certainly appreciate it for what it is, and I definitely, and I've read the novel, and I think it was well made, but in the end, it just didn't really. It wasn't like wow. I've already talked about a few films that makes me go wow, and there are a few more films that are going to be coming up that will also make me go wow. But this is one of those films where it does not make me go wow. I would say that if you've read the novel, definitely give it a spin. If you like any of the actors or actresses that I mentioned, definitely give it a spin. And really, that's it. Pretty straightforward. So, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And until next time, take care.